This happened in 2017, the year my daughter was born. It all began when we first moved into our house, which was built in 2010, so it was fairly new. I was still pregnant at the time. While moving in, I noticed that the light in our daughter's room would be left on, no matter how many times we switched it off. I brushed it off as an accident, or maybe an electrical problem, until a few months later, after my daughter was born. We settled into our new home and made the room above the garage our hangout spot. One day I went to take a shower while my husband watched our 4-month-old daughter. He told me that while he was in the rocking chair, he thought he saw me making my way to the garage. He distinctly remembered seeing my dark brown hair, but when he got up and went to the garage, there was no one there. He checked the upstairs hangout room, but again, there was no one. This really creeped us out, but somehow we were able to move past it. We didn't mention this incident to anyone. However, when our daughter had to have surgery 4 months later, our friend volunteered to house sit for us while we were in the hospital. He had been resting on the futon in the hangout room when he felt something aggressively hitting the mattress. Again, we never told him about our experiences in the house, but our hearts sank when he messaged my husband, asking us if our house was haunted. With everything that was going on with our daughter at the time, the last thing we wanted to hear was confirmation that our house was haunted. From that point on, whenever I was in the hangout room, I felt that unnerving sensation you get when you're being watched. I only ever had this feeling when I was near that room. Sometimes I would be in the garage doing something, and I would glance up to see the closet door in the hangout room cracked open, even though I knew I had closed it. Small things like this may not sound too alarming, but in the back of my mind, I knew that there was an unwelcomed presence in my house. I imagined that something was just behind that closet door, staring daggers at me, waiting for me to make a move. We dealt with this dark presence in that house until the day we moved out of there. Thankfully, we haven't seen or felt anything since. I'll mention that this all took place in Kingston, North Carolina, which was a prominent town during the Civil War. I can only speculate what happened on that property years ago, but I know for a fact that it left behind something dark and hateful. And I can't help but think if we had stayed there, something terrible would have happened to us. All across the country, there are several local racetracks like the ones you see on NASCAR, where people can race several different kinds of cars every week. I've always loved NASCAR, and my goal is to compete in Daytona one day, though realistically I'm not sure that'll ever happen. Ever since I was 11 years old, I've been racing at a local track in Florida. I race what are known as super late models, which is the closest thing you can get to an actual race car. Over the years, I've gotten to be a pretty good driver, usually winning multiple competitions every year. This is going to sound off topic, but up till September of last year, I had never believed in the supernatural or paranormal. But then something very unusual happened that made me reconsider my future as a racer. It was a beautiful Saturday night. It was 75 degrees out with a full moon and a slight breeze. I was getting ready for a big 200-lap race with over 30 drivers in attendance. I would be starting in 3rd place. About a half hour before the race, though, something in my gut told me not to get in my car. But when you're a race car driver, you get used to being nervous, and you just have to suck it up and deal with it. But this time felt different. I had this nagging feeling that something terrible would happen if I got into the car. Even though I couldn't shake off this feeling, I still got in, and by the time the green flag waved and the race started, I had almost forgotten about it. 10 laps into the race, 2 cars spun behind me and collided with the inside wall. The caution flag flew, signaling all the drivers to slow down as the wreck was cleaned up. Now, that dreadful sensation returned. However, this time, It made me physically sick. I could no longer race. So I went through the opening at turn 1, which led to an area where all the race teams worked on their cars. As soon as I undid my belts and climbed out of my car, I threw up. My crew and I then packed up and headed home. My car was loaded onto the hauler, and my friend Pete drove me home in his pickup truck. During the ride, I reclined in his passenger seat and tried to get some rest. The next thing I knew, I was hovering over the racetrack, watching as the cars below battled for position, merely inches away from each other, trying to gain as much ground as possible. As I looked down on the track, one of the cars caught my eye, a familiar white and red car running at 9th place, with a black number 62 on its sides and roof. I recognized it because it was my car. I remember being confused and lowering myself to the ground to get a better view. I landed in the infield near turn 1, watching myself racing to stay within the top 10. About 5 laps went by before the unthinkable happened. My car then launched off the side of another, and I watched in terror as my vehicle slid into the opening of turn 1, going over 100 miles per hour, hitting the driver's side first. Even with how durable race cars are, the hit was so hard that it ripped my car in half and tore everything below my hips off. The back half of the car slid back down onto the track. I then heard myself screaming in agony as the other driver swerved, trying to avoid the wreckage. But one driver hit me head on, finishing off my destroyed vehicle and putting me out of my misery. I watched from the infield as my head, ribs, lungs, and guts went flying as my car was obliterated by the impact. My innards landing in splattered piles all over the track. More drivers drove through the piles of gore. Then I heard more screaming coming from the stands, and I look up. A few pieces of my car had gone over the fence and into the stands, which resulted in the death of anyone who happened to be sitting in the line of fire. This description doesn't do justice to what I saw. After taking in the horrifying scene of blood and shouting, everything went black. I opened my eyes to find myself reclined in the passenger seat of Pete's pickup truck. I woke up just as we got back to my house. I thanked him and headed inside. About a half hour later, my friend Buck, who drives my hauler, pulled into the driveway with my car. After he left, I called it a night. As horrifying as my dream was, I wasn't going to let it bother me. Race car drivers always think about fatal crashes as a possibility, and it's just something that we have to accept. Besides, it was just a dream. Or so I thought. The next day I woke up at around 9:30, and after I had my breakfast and brushed my teeth and did everything else you would expect someone to do in the morning, I went into my garage where I kept my race car. I was going to get to work prepping it for the next week's race, when I noticed something that made me shit myself. There was a massive dent in the driver's side door of the car, right where I hit the wall in that freaky dream. I looked inside, and I saw a huge crack going down the roll cage. In that moment, I wondered if I should ever race again. As I said before, I never really believed in premonitions, ghosts, spirits, or anything like that. But after that horrifying vision, I began to wonder about a lot of things. Why did I suddenly feel a strong urge to not race that night? Why did I get sick? How did my mind depict such a vivid, fucked up scenario? What if it wasn't a dream at all, but a premonition? Perhaps it was a glimpse into an alternate reality. If I hadn't gotten sick that night, would I have lived to race another day? Would everyone who was there that night be forever traumatized by the sight of my mangled body flying everywhere? If it was just a bad dream, why did my car have the damage in the exact same spot depicted in the vision? I'm a believer now. Something beyond my understanding was at work that night. Somehow I know that myself and several other people would have died a terrible death that night if it hadn't intervened. I work at a haunted office. In fact, the entire property is haunted, but our office is known to have the most activity. Anyone who works here can testify to that. You could say that I'm the one who's actually haunted. I've experienced paranormal activity my entire life, and as I like to tell people, dead people like me. I've worked for the company for about 15 years now, and I've seen chairs move by themselves, doors slamming shut when no one else is there, and I've heard whispers in the hallways. I've also felt hands on my shoulders, and was even goosed one time while getting something out of the filing cabinet. But the one incident everyone always talks about is the day of the pens. This was witnessed not only by an office full of employees, but also by the employees from other departments as well, along with my manager. There had always been some minor activity before, but this was on another level. To put it simply, we were under attack. It started out like any other morning. I remember overhearing my coworker telling the office funny guy to stop throwing pens. The guy looked absolutely bewildered. He had no clue what he was talking about. After he went on break, my coworker was hit by another pen. Now properly pissed off, he turned around again, ready to take someone's head off, but there was no one there. The office then became a hive of flying pens over the next few hours. They appeared in midair, launching themselves throughout the office. It was both unsettling and bizarre. One of the pens flew over my manager's head, and he immediately shut himself in his office. My coworker, in an effort to stop the chaos, collected every single pen in the office, except the ones that were being used to write with, and then placed them into a locked drawer. But then the enemy upgraded its ammunition to the even scarier push pens, along with paper clips. I know this might sound amusing, but on a serious note, if one woman hadn't been wearing her glasses, she would have been hit directly in the eye by one of the flying pens. Several other employees from different departments came by the office and witnessed the attack of the airborne pens. My manager even asked me if I had sage on me to burn, but I had left it at home that day. Some people in the office resorted to prayer. Finally, after several hours, it stopped as suddenly as it began. We haven't experienced anything on that scale ever since, and hopefully, we never will. There's always a reason.